while Mother was raising the children. And at that time, only my brothers were born. And then later, they moved to Brady, Texas, where he had more grocery stores in Brady and little neighboring towns, which is what most of the Jewish merchants did. They owned either grocery stores or dry goods stores or general stores. And his brothers, he had 4 brothers, and they all owned stores in various towns. Menard, Texas was one of them, where one of my uncles also ran a department store or general store, and a meat market, and a delivery service, and a grocery store. So the entire city of Menard at that time, it should have been called Walenskyville, because so many of the enterprises were his own. So,
what did the dry goods stores carry at that time?
Oh, everything for farmers. They had, in addition to mechanical equipment like plows and reins for the horses and saddles, and they also carried a very nice, high quality men's clothing and boots. They had like Hart, Schaffner, and Marks clothing, and handmade, hand-tooled boots. And then they also had ladies' wear, and I know the buyers, my aunts were the buyers, and they came into Dallas for the shows, for the apparel shows, and bought merchandise, and they bought only the finest quality, because these farmers and ranchers, mostly ranchers, were wealthy enough to afford very good quality things, and they demanded it, and they had the money to spend on clothing. So that was, and they also had children's clothing and shoes. So there was just everything that a family would need. And then my father had the grocery store, which also included tires at one time, and service station equipment and gasoline. So he did like garage work, had a man that did it, garage work, repairs, plus tires, plus gasoline.
What was the difference between the general store and the dry goods store, would you say?
Not very much, except dry goods store was like piece goods and ready-to-wear clothing that you could wear right out of the store.
Mm-hmm.
A general store had more farm goods. They had like saddles and in addition to groceries.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a difference.
Okay. Now, what about your Jewish education? What was it like when you were growing up?
When I was living in Brady, by then all my 4 brothers were born, and of course they were all older than I. And I can remember when I was about 4 years old, we had this big flood in Brady when the Brady River overflowed, and that was very traumatic. And I remember my dad took us to the rooftop so that we could look over the whole city and see how bad the flooding was. But our house, fortunately, was on a hill and was not damaged. But we used to come to Dallas on any holiday, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, of course, and the major holidays that we celebrated. And my mother came and we stayed at my grandmother's. That was Hyman Stillman and his family, my Bubby and Zeta. And of course all my aunts and uncles lived in Dallas, my mother's brothers and sisters-in-law, and her sisters and brothers-in-law. So I had lots of cousins to play with, and they were all similar in age. And until I was 8 years old, I really knew very little about the Jewish religion other than what my mother could tell me about the Jewish holidays and when they occurred and why they were celebrated. And when we moved back to, my father died when I was almost 7. He died in May and I was going to be 7 in June. And so my mother continued having the grocery stores, and gradually she sold them all. And my brother Saul, he was the oldest, helped her maintain the stores. And we moved back to Dallas when I was 8. By then I was ready for the 3rd grade, and my mother enrolled me at Sheriff Israel. And that was where my grandparents went to shul. So I got my main education, I suppose, there. Then later, Herzl Heichel, excuse me, was built, and since that was closer and I could get there by walking, my mother thought it would be a good idea if we all enrolled in that Sunday school and Hebrew school for my brothers. So my brothers all went to Hebrew school, and at that time girls were not taught Hebrew unless it was by a special tutor. So anyway, I was confirmed at a Good Asylum, which was part of Herzl Heichel, and I no longer was affiliated. I really was affiliated, but I maintained my friendship with my friends that I grew up with and lived close by at Herzl Heichel Talmud Torah, that was the name of it, and at Good Asylum. And then later I went to Colonial Hill School, which everyone went to, and then by the time I was in 6th grade, my family moved to a different home on Grand Avenue, which was across the street from Brown School, John Henry Brown School, and that was on Grand Avenue, and I transferred to that school. By then my brothers were in high school, so it didn't matter to them which school I was attending as long as they were all able to go to Forest Avenue High School. So that's where we all graduated from, and then later I went to SMU.
Now, when you were younger, before you moved to Grand, and when you were visiting your relatives here in Dallas, where did they live and where did you live?
They lived on Cleveland Street, and we bought a home on Birmingham. Well, for a while we lived on Latimer, and then from there we moved to Birmingham, and from Birmingham we moved to Grand Avenue.
Now, how long did you live in Grand Avenue?
From the time I was in 6th grade, I guess I was about 11 or 12, until I graduated high school. And by then, after high school, I was at SMU, and we had to ride a bus, a streetcar, and another streetcar to get there. But we managed to get there. And by then, people were moving to East Dallas or North Dallas or Highland Park or wherever.
About what year?
That was about in 43, or 45, I guess. Yes, because all my brothers were in the Air Force. They had all enlisted, all 4, and they were able to all come back home. And so my mother was actually waiting for their return so she could sell the house and move somewhere, but not in South Dallas, because I think it had become crime-ridden, and it was not as well preserved, I guess, as some of the other areas in Dallas. Well taken care of either.
What was your Jewish education like as far as Hebrew? What was the extent of it? Was it just
I was confirmed at a Good Asylum, and then after I was out of school and working like at Gal Excel, one of my few jobs. But anyway, while I was working there, I met Jerry Lane, who was the CPA, and married him. And he was a member of Temple Emmanuel, or in Philadelphia there was a Temple Emmanuel, and that's where he got his Jewish education. So he said, well, let's transfer there. I think we would like that. And we were married at Temple, and Rabbi Lefkowitz, well known in Dallas, married us. And after our wedding, we retained our membership at Temple Emmanuel, and that's where I've retained mine since 1951.
And what was it like going to Hebrew school?
As far as I know, my brothers attended the Hebrew school that was on Park Road. And I was not encouraged to go, so I didn't. But
Or at Sunday school, excuse me. You said
Sunday
you went to
school.
Hertz Heigl.
Yeah, and at Sunday school, I had wonderful experiences, and I can remember, as a matter of fact, Saul Kaplan was one of our teachers, and he was very social-minded, economically, and he had a certain feeling for the underprivileged. And I can remember one time he took us for a ride, some of the class, in his station wagon, and pointed out areas of Dallas that was so poor and so in bad need of repair, in need of a lot of repairs. And that was south of, I'm trying to think, I guess you'd say it was south of Sears Roebuck. That would be South Lamar, in that area, and also very deep South Colonial. And there were homes I didn't even know about that existed, and how we as better off citizens were able to, or should be able to, take care of our own and others as well. And those who are less fortunate needed a lot of attention and help along the way. And so I remember going to a lot of the commercial businesses in our neighborhood and asking for donations to help these unfortunate people. And we brought them to Sunday school, and then we knocked on these people's homes, front doors, and said, we're here from the Good Asachim Synagogue, and we wanted you to have food in a basket. And we would bring like a turkey or a chicken or anything we thought that they could use, eggs, bread. And they welcomed us into the home. But here we were like 11 and 12 years old. And I remember being able to help these people, and what a wonderful feeling it was, because they were so thankful and so appreciative of everything we did.
But what year was that?
Let's see. I would think 39 or 40. And that was, the end of the Depression area, and yet World War II had not started. After World War II began and ended, we ended up with a better economy than we had during the Depression. That helped our economy so much.
Now let's talk about grammar school. You said you went to Colonial.
Yes, I did.
Okay, tell us about that experience.
Well, this was very exciting to me, because here I was from Brady, Texas, where I had attended for kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And when I came to Dallas, I was in the third grade. And here I was looking at this school thinking, oh my gosh, it is tremendous. I'll never find my way around. And I did. And at that same day, registering for her classes was another little girl, and her name happened to be Lorelei Welton. I'm sure you know her. And she later became Lorelei Marks. And here she was from New York, thinking what a little bitty school this was, because she came from a tremendous school that took up 2 square blocks. And she thought this was such a small, insignificant looking building. And she was very disappointed in it. And here I was with eyes as big as saucers, trying to take all this in and wondering how in the world am I going to find my way around Colonial Hill School. But I did manage, and we became good friends and stayed friends until she passed on. But I remember my classes, we only had like maybe 20 children in each class. They were comparatively small, and that too surprised Lorelei. And at one point, I started in 3rd grade, and I suppose I did pretty well, because by the time I was in 4th grade, I was in what they called a split section, and that was part 5th grade and part 4th grade, and I was in the accelerated group, and so we learned a lot of 5th grade work while we were in the 4th grade. And then we did that again when we became 5th graders, we learned 6th grade work, and plus our own level. And then when we were in 6th grade, we had a split section again and learned 7th grade. So that was very interesting, and I remember some of my teachers, Miss Copes, who taught history, and Miss Hill, and Miss Huffines, who taught us writing and drawing, and we learned to make push-pulls and ovals and improve our handwriting. So that was a lot of fun. And I always liked school. I never had a problem with that. I guess I've still retained a quest for knowledge.
Was Brown School, you said you lived with Brown School,
yes,
how was that?
That was almost the same. It was about the same size, and we had similar teachers, and I enjoyed that. Mrs. Boone was our principal, and we had, there were more children, I think, of the Jewish faith at Brown School than there were at Colonial. I noticed that immediately because I was put in a class, and that too had an accelerated group, and I was put into that group. So I had that at the 6th and 7th grade, and that too it wasn't a split section, but I do remember we did advanced work, so that was enjoyable to me.
What about Forest High?
Well, at Forest, everyone who graduated from Brown School enrolled at Forest High, because that was the neighborhood high school, and I actually could walk, and my mother wasn't too concerned or worried as we would be today. I would not let my children walk more than 2 or 3 blocks, if that long. And there were no blacks in the schools, but we did have more independence, and everyone had a schedule to follow, and I took college courses and college prep courses because I knew I was going to college, and so many others did the same thing, and many of our John Henry Brown students sort of remained friends and stayed together. It was a very congenial group, And then I was fortunate enough to become reacquainted with my colonial friends and got to see them again. And so I had two sets of friends that I became acquainted with.
What about SMU?
That was fun also. I loved that. I enjoyed it. I was not a member of a sorority, but I was on the Mustang staff and the Rotunda staff. That was the yearbook and the newspaper, and I wanted to major in journalism, which my mother objected to. She kept saying, "Do you know I've read that journalism is the lowest paying profession you can get into? Why would you want to do that? Why don't you become a teacher and make more money?" And I said, "Because it's a lot more fun writing about it." So that was how I got into journalism. And I was, when I read in the paper that KIXL, that Lee Siegel had been awarded a contract with the FCC to open a radio station in Dallas. And he was a graduate of Forest Avenue High School as well. And I wrote him a letter, and I said, I detailed my experience and my education, and I told him that I had been an editor of the Forest Echo and of the Forester yearbook. And so about a week or two later, he called me on the phone at home, and he said, "Anyone who would admit to being an editor of the Forest High Echo deserves a job with me." And that was how I got hired. And we didn't know what I was going to do at the radio station because it was still being built. The building was not quite finished. There was no heat. We had little portable heaters that we plugged in everywhere, and we took it with us. There was one heater that I used and one that he used, and we did have our engineer at that time, and Bob Tripp, and he also carried a little heater with him because it was December and it was very cold, and the building hadn't been finished, and the heating and air conditioning had not been installed. So wherever we went, we took our little heater, and then we had one telephone, and when it rang, you might be in another studio or down the hall, and you'd have to go look for the telephone. But we finally got it together, and the station opened. So I was there literally from the ground floor up.
Where was it located?
1401 South Ackard Street in almost downtown Dallas, south of downtown Dallas.
Let's see, I want to back up a little bit because you were married to Richard Lane.
Yes.
Okay, and then what happened? I mean, your name is Tracy now.
Yes,
So,
I married Jerry Lane
Lane,
in 1960. Let's see, I married him in 1951. And we were divorced in 1970, that was it. And then in 1976, I married Helen Tracey. And he was from Burlington, Vermont. And as he used to say, there were only 50 Jews in Burlington, Vermont, but there were 3 synagogues, or a temple and 2 synagogues. So that was very interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And we did go there quite often in the summertime only. He would not return in the winter. He knew about the climate, having been raised there. Mm-hmm. But he had a showroom in the Dallas Trade Mart and represented Sheffield silver and Irish crystal and Haviland china, and those were called tabletop lines. And I helped him in the showroom a lot, and especially during shows. And I enjoyed working with him and helping him build his business.
Were there a lot of Jewish people as sales representatives?
Oh,
you
yes.
want to talk about that whole
area? Yes, there were a lot of salesmen in the apparel mart mainly, and in the Furniture and World Trade Center, where my husband was, there were fewer Jewish families and Jewish people. But he knew most of them, and he was vice president of the organization of traveling salesmen that was called TOLA. And that was named, or it was called TOLA, because it represented men who traveled or women who traveled in the Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas territory. And Irwin had that was his territory, plus the state of Missouri. So he was a little bit farther along than his territory was farther along than some of the other salespeople. But he had 4 or 5 salesmen who worked for him. And so he was able to stay in Dallas most of the time. And unless there was a big show like in New Orleans or in St. Louis or Little Rock, Arkansas, he had his salesmen call on various stores. And he did a lot of business with the Zale Corporation because they, at that time, sold silver to new brides or registered brides. And of course now, brides don't select silver and china and crystal as they once did. Sometimes they do, but very rarely. So anyway, he sold the business in 1994, yes. And he thought that he was ready to retire. And he became ill in 96 and passed away.
Sorry.
Yes.
Was that a general pattern as far as the salespeople that had offices in
Yes,
the building?
so many of them
Trade Center.
did. They maintained a home in Dallas, but they traveled in this area. I know in the tabletop area, they all had TOLA, which means that they were able to sell or represent their companies in these 4 states. And then in the apparel business, which was the Apparel Mart, which was across Industrial Boulevard, or across Inwood, I guess it is, from the Trade Mart. All of these buildings were owned by Trammell Crow, and he promoted showrooms and leased them to the salesmen. And as they became larger in their sales, they increased their staff, and they hired additional salespeople to help them. And that's the way Irwin's business went.
Now let's go back to Jewish observance.
Okay.
What are the Jewish holidays, or what do you observe, and how do you observe?
Well, having been a member of Temple for so long, we follow every holiday that Temple Emmanuel celebrates, and we always have our seats at Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and we usually have a family get-together. Lately it's been at my daughter and son-in-law's. My daughter is Nancy, and she's married to Eddie Hute. He's from a well-known family in Dallas too, and they attend Shereth Israel since she married him. She's, of course, followed his religion and his family background, and I think he's about 5th generation at Shereth Israel. So she's active over there and attend services there. So it's a little difficult sometimes to arrange our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur dinners, because Rosh Hashanah services are different times at Temple and at Shereth Israel, but we do manage. So we all get together at that time. And my son and daughter-in-law also attend. And we enjoy having as many as we can get.
Now, your son, where does he go?
He lives in Dallas,
Yeah.
and he's a CPA, and he's with a firm called Lane Gorman, and Lane Gorman Truett, which was founded by Jerry Lane. But Jerry Lane has since retired, and so the firm is now in the hands of Vic Truett's son, Richard Truett, and my son, Robert Lane, and who are descendants of the originals, and several others. And so they have a very large CPA practice in the city of Dallas.
Now, does he go to Temple or Sheriff Israel? Where does he go? He goes to Temple?
Mhm. They were all, my two children were confirmed in Temple and had their confirmation there.
Now, how about Yom Kippur? Does everybody fast, or do some of the people fast? Do you fast? Or?
I used to until, I guess after my mother passed away, we sort of became less observant. But then we became, as you get older, you become dependent on medication, and certain medications have to be taken with food, so it's a little difficult to fast. So I have not fasted in quite a few years, but I do remember going through the fast and observing it as everyone else did.
How about Sukkot or Sukkot?
We always go to temple for Sukkot's holiday, and usually the Friday night before. Temple has an outdoor sukkah every year, and we like. They also have a Hanukkah menorah outdoors, and there's a beautiful ceremony that they do, and we light the candles and say our prayers out at the. It's sort of in the like a patio outside the temple, and this lovely menorah. It's a wrought iron, beautiful thing that when lit, and then the temple choir, who is known worldwide, they have about 100 members. The choir always performs and sings, so that's our Hanukkah and Purim celebration, and they're both done at temple.
And do you light candles at home also for Hanukkah or not?
I do for Hanukkah and I do for Friday night. It's just a tradition, and I just feel better doing it.
Mm-hmm. What about, now, how about Pesach? How about Passover? How do you deal with
Well,
Pesach?
we have the first 2 nights at my son-in-law Eddie Utah's house, the first night, and his sister Gloria Utah has it the second night. So we're all over there, plus there are many Utah relatives that are invited. So sometimes we've had as many as 36 people, in the 30s anyway, people attending the Passover. And they rent tables, and we end up with tables that are sort of U-shaped, and it's like a Roman banquet practically. But it is a lovely service, and we all enjoy that.
Now, is the Seder a traditional? You say it's a lovely service. Is it traditional? Does it go through the whole Haggadah?
We go through the whole Haggadah. It is read from cover to cover. And we sing songs at the end.
Good. What about Shavuos?
Well, I don't think we really observe that. I guess we should, but we don't. Sorry to say.
What about Eddie and your daughter? Do they go to synagogue
Oh, yes.
at Shavuot?
At Sheriff Israel.
Sheriff.
Very active members.
Do you go to Yizkor services?
Yes, I always observe Yizkor at Temple. And I honor my mother, my father, my 4 brothers now, and some of my aunts and uncles whose yard-side I do remember, and cousins. And so I have their name read at Temple services on Friday night and Saturday morning.
Now, how about Shabbat, Saturdays? How do you observe? Do you not observe? How do you
I do not observe those, and my son and my son-in-law end up working on Saturday, so it's a little difficult. And we know that it is Shabbat, and I have attended various services on Saturday. In fact, if I cannot attend on Friday night, I will go Saturday morning and hear the memorial service for whichever relative or my mother or father that's being honored. So I always do that.
Has your observance changed in any way from your childhood? And if so, how has it changed?
Yes, of course, as we grow older, we, I guess, become less observant or sometimes more. My grandparents, I can remember, always went to services, and I used to go with them on Saturday. And they always had Passover, and they always had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at their house. When we were living in Brady as a little girl, I was from 4 to 8 years old when we lived in Brady. We came in for every holiday, and it was just a huge service because my Zeta conducted the service, and with his 8 children and their in-laws, we must have had about 50 people for dinner or lunch or whatever holiday we were experiencing. And so I always thought of holidays as that's when the families get together, and that's still the case.
You said your Zeta conducted services at which show?
At a good asylum. He was, what was his title? Shamas? Which,
okay.
yeah. And he took care of making sure it was locked up. I remember that. And I stayed with him a couple of times while he locked up everything. Of course, he opened it at an earlier hour than I was up, so I didn't go to that.
Did he ever read the Torah or lead from the Bima, from the actual podium?
He and some of my uncles, Sam Stillman, Aaron Stillman, Morris Stillman, they were all very active at Good-a-Zah.
You want to describe the synagogue, the show there?
Well, I remember that it had a balcony upstairs for women and children, and then downstairs men sat, and there was a bima in the center where the rabbi spoke and where the Torah was read. And I remember as a child marching in the Simchas Torah with a flag and a candle and fruit and all the things that we had to do. It was a lot of fun. That's probably where I first met you, because I was friendly with your sister Sarah.
Right. Do you remember the location of Good-a-Zah?
On Forest Avenue and Wendelkin, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you hold any other membership to any of the other shuls other than Temple now?
I'm not.
Any other
No, I'm not. But I've attended various sisterhood things at Sheriff Israel. My cousin, Fanny Angrist, was president of Sheriff Israel Sisterhood. And whenever there was a luncheon or dinner or anything that she was involved in, I, of course, had to attend. That was a prerequisite. So I had to go there.
Yeah.
And I still attend some things over there because I have many friends who attend Sheriff Israel and are members of the sisterhood.
About what years would you say some of your changes came about as far as observance and relationships and stuff in the various groups?
Well, by the time my children were confirmed, they're 4 years apart, and so that would have been about 1973 and 69, I would say, they were confirmed. And after that, My son attended Sunday school at Temple for maybe 1 year after that. Nancy, I think, attended Sunday school maybe a year or two after confirmation. But by then, they were in Green Hill private school, and that school had so many activities and so many involvements for the children that they hardly had time to do anything else plus their homework. And they both were good students, so I felt that that was the most important thing. So they weren't as active in the Jewish organizations as they could have been, but as active as most of the students at Green Hill were.
Mm-hmm.
And they did have an A. Brith chapter, and I think they had a BBG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has the service changed over the years at Temple?
Temple has become a little more observant, and more Hebrew has been introduced, and we now have a choir director who is not Jewish, but is very well learned in Jewish religion. I think he's also a conductor of the choir at one of the churches in Richardson, but he manages to split his time between the two. That's Ralph Stannard, and I think everyone in Dallas is acquainted with him. He's such a well-known choir director. And then we have Richard Cohn, who's our cantor, who has a lovely voice and conducts our temple choir and sings with the temple choir too. And then he solos and is at every religious holiday. So he's very well thought of at Temple. And of course, I'm very fond of Rabbi Stern and all the new rabbis. We seem to have, I think at present, there must be 6 or 8 rabbis at Temple. And one is younger than the other, but they're all, and I'm sure Sheriff Israel has the same thing. Every congregation has the young rabbis, and I think they're interesting and fun, and I was privileged to get to know many of them. I am privileged.
Now you mentioned Cantor Cohn. Did Temple have any type of, or at what point in time did he come to Temple?
Rephrase that.
Did Temple have a cantor when you were growing up?
Oh yes, they've always had one. We've had, let's see, what was his name now? I can't recall it. Sam Adler was one of the main and first cantors and choir directors, and let's see, following him, I can't recall his name, but he was very active. He still is on the SMU faculty at the music department at SMU. He retired from Temple about 2 years ago when Richard Cohen came. And so, but they've always had a choir director as far as I can remember.
All right, now,
they've always had a choir.
Choir director is going to be different than a cantor.
Yes. Temple just recently started having cantors. We had a female cantor at one time, and now we have Cantor Cohn.
Now, when did Temple start having a cantor? When did the lady come to Temple? If she were the first one that came?
I would suppose about 15 or 20 years ago.
That means they would have had a cantor in late 1990s?
Yes. At that time, they had a female cantor from New York City who was there. I can see her face, but I can't recall her name. They had two different ones. One followed the other, and then finally we've had, maybe there were three. Finally we got Rabbi Cantor Cohn.
And they actually participated in the actual service?
Yes, and
Okay.
sang on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur especially.
What about the other services?
Sometimes on Friday night. I don't think that was a regular time for them to appear. Sometimes they did. Mostly it was the choir that performed.
Did they also work with the choir, or did they?
Yes, they've all worked with the choir.
Now, does Cantor Cohen work in the same? You said he didn't.
Well, he's not the choir director, but he works with the choir, sings with the choir, and they incorporate his cantorial recitals, I guess you'd call them, with the choir. But he's been there, this is about his 4th or 5th year, and he's very well regarded.
Now, let's talk about Jewish organizations and your involvement with any of the Jewish organizations.
Well, I'm a member of Hadassah, and I have in the past been a member of Council of Jewish Women. I'm a member of Temple Sisterhood, and what else? There's the Jewish American Congress, and my very good friend Nelda Golden is very active in that, and I've gone to many of their programs, and once a year I think they have a big fundraiser at the Galleria, the Western Galleria, and I've attended that.
Were you a member of any Jewish organizations growing up?
Growing up, I was in Junior Hadassah, which was founded by Sarah Sussman and Deanie Siegel. And that was from, I guess, my high school years, I guess, when I was about either a freshman in high school or 7th grader at John Henry Brown. That organization was formed, and I was a member of one of the first Hadassah chapters. And there was also a Young Judea chapter at Agudas Achim that I was a member of. Selma Riceberg was our leader for that one.
About what years?
Oh, let me think. 37 or 38, maybe. Yeah, that would make me about 12 years old. About 38.
And when you joined Junior Hadassah, how old were you? What years?
Oh, probably the following year. 39, maybe. There was always some form of Jewish, some organization of Jewish origin that we all belonged to. Growing up in South Dallas, you knew everyone, and or knew most everyone, and so all the females that I knew were members of Junior Hadassah, and Sarah Sussman managed to recruit them all, and I think I was president of Junior Hadassah at one time.
Was B'nai B'rith involved at all?
Not as much.
At that point in time?
Not as much. B'nai B'rith, I was not aware of it until I was out of high school.
What about ACA?
ACA, my brothers were very active in ACA chapters. Of course, because of the athletics, they played basketball, baseball, football, and they had several Jewish organizations that they belonged to, the AZA and the FHH, and Iota. I know my brothers, Saul and Bill and Leon, were all members of that, of those organizations. Not one, but three. And they played baseball, football, basketball, tennis, anything else with a ball.
What about Jewish Community Center?
They were active at the Jewish Community Center because that's where they played. That was the ball field.
Did you also go to the Jewish Community Center?
I did, yes. And during the war, there were dances for servicemen, and I went to those and helped serve punch and cookies. It was fun. I think I was a little younger, and my mother wasn't too thrilled about letting me go to those dances because she didn't think a 14-year-old or 15-year-old girl should be there. She said, wait until you're out of high school, then you can go. So I guess I was a little on the retarded end of social life, but I didn't get to go to some of the dances, but some of my friends did.
When were the dances held?
At the Jewish Community Center, they had an upstairs reception hall, I guess it was, and they had a jukebox, and sometimes they had an orchestra. And I think I must have gone to 3 or 4 of them.
What night?
I believe it was on Saturday night. What else? That's when the only night you could stay out late because there was no homework.
Now, what about Sunday mornings? Do you remember
And
anything
Sunday
about
morning,
Sunday?
I went to Sunday school
Okay.
until I was confirmed. And then by then I was about 13 or 14. So after that I did not, I think I taught Sunday school at a good asylum. The first year that I was, after I'd been confirmed, I helped teach a class, Selma Riceberg's class. And this was like kindergarten and first grade, 6-year-olds, I think. But we had a good time. We always took the kids on a tour of something, and it would end up with an ice cream soda or an ice cream at Friedman's Pharmacy in South Dallas.
Where was that located?
That was on Harwood and Grand Avenue. And we had a good time doing that.
Yeah. How many years did the Sunday school have to it when you were confirmed, for example? What grade were you in?
I was in, I'm 13 or 14. Yeah, I can't remember whether I was in I was still in John Henry Brown 7th grade, or maybe I was a freshman at Forest High.
Mm-hmm.
One of those 2 years, that was when I was confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very small class. We had like 4 or 5 girls and 4 or 5 boys. That was about 10 children. And the Sunday school as such was very much smaller. But I know when my children were confirmed at Temple, there were about 75. And I couldn't get over the difference. But it was different from what I underwent.
Yeah. Have you been involved, wait a minute, what other organizations have you been in through the years?
That I have been involved
have you
in?
been involved in other organizations?
Well, Sisterhood of Temple and Council of Jewish Women and Hadassah and the American Jewish Congress. That's about it.
Approximate years. Excuse me. How about approximate years?
Years, I'd say from about 51, 52, because that was when I first married, until, I'm still a member of Temple Sisterhood and still a member of Hadassah, and I'm no longer a member of Council of Jewish Women. I just don't have time. But I'm also active in our Forest High Alumni Association, and So those are about the three organizations. And I also volunteer at Medical City, although none of my doctors are there. But I volunteer at Medical City on Tuesday afternoon. I'm there from 1 to 5 at the information desk. And I've been there for about 4 or 5 years.
Do you remember the addresses that of the homes that you lived in?
I can remember Forest, the school, let's see, the house that we lived on Grand Avenue was 2819. And when we lived on Birmingham, it was 2617. And I can remember some of my aunts in South Dallas. The Cohens lived at 2822 Peabody. And my cousins, the Angers and Serpers, lived at 3025 South Boulevard. I think those addresses just are instilled in us. You probably know about that too.
All right, were the neighborhoods, how Jewish were they as far as the neighborhoods in that general area? When you talk about the boundaries of that, or general boundaries of that.
I would say from about Myers Street on that would be the east side, to Colonial, or maybe even Lamar on the west side. That and on the south side, maybe off of Colonial, it went farther south. There was Wendelkin and Panama Place. Those streets were farther south than the ones that were off Oakland or Myers, or I guess it went only as far as Metropolitan, as far as Jewish families were concerned. I'd say in almost every block there was at least one Jewish family. On the north, I guess it was Grand Avenue.
Okay, now what about the structures of the homes that you lived in? Were they?
Most of them were brick and frame combination.
Did you have anybody living in the household other than your immediate family?
You mean like second generation?
An uncle or a cousin or anybody living, or a grandparent?
Grandparents usually came and lived with their families. When we first moved from Brady to Dallas, we lived with my grandparents until my mother could find a house that she wanted to buy. And we stayed with them for maybe a year. When I was in 3rd grade, and then we moved to Latimer when I was, I guess it was in the summer of my 3rd grade, so that must have been about 3rd or 4th grade. But we stayed about a year with them until we realized where we wanted to live and so forth, and find a house.
One minute.
Did your mother?
1 minute.
1 minute?
It's a 60-minute tape.
Okay.
Is our time running up?
The tape's almost done.
Oh.
Have there been any intermarriages in the family?
Any
With
one?
intermarriages with people who are not
Yes,
Jewish?
my brother was married to Hazel Davidson, who was not Jewish, but I think she was Jewish by association. She was a cheerleader at Forest High and very well known, and he was very active at school too. And they became good friends, and later that grew into love, and they married. And my mother had objected to the marriage at first, but she knew Hazel because she was also my friend too. And I used to bring her over, and she spent the night with me many nights, so my mother knew her very well. But anyway, my brother married her, and they were married 65 years. So, and she celebrated Jewish religion with us and all our Jewish holidays. And we went to their house sometimes for Christmas or July 4th or any other occasion that we wanted to celebrate.
We'll have to continue because I think
Is this
we're...
the end of the tape?
I think so. Are we still on or not?
It's still running, but I don't know.
Well, what about the kids that they had? Did they have kids?
Yes. Leon and Hazel, you mean the intermarried couple?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they had 2 boys.
And what about the kids? What are
They are no longer Jewish. She also attended St. John's Episcopal, which Leon attended with her when he wasn't attending Temple. But they had a very happy, healthy marriage, and their 2 sons have become very active in the Episcopal Church. But they are very interested in the Jewish religion, and they come for Seder, for Passover. They help us celebrate that particular holiday. I don't know why that particular one is fun for them, I think, and they like to celebrate it. And as a matter of fact, I used to bring my Haggadah books to Leon, and he conducted a service for that church, for St. John's Episcopal. Once a year, Leon would come over after Passover, or maybe before Passover, or during Passover, and get all those books, all the Haggadahs, and I would make him some harosis or chopped liver or various things that he needed for the Passover Seder night, and he would conduct one so that members of his that congregation could observe what a Seder was like. So that was sort of a family tradition. In addition to our own Seder, we had Leon's Seder, which got to be kind of a joke, but it really helped. And to this day, his younger son, Dan, does that at St. John's. So I know that they regard their Jewish roots as something special for them. And both of them have 2 daughters, both of those sons. And I know the girls are aware of the fact that they have Jewish roots.
How old are the girls now?
They're in their 20s. They're out of school, and one works for Parkland Hospital. She's a nurse, and one daughter works for Freeman and Associates. That's a big organization that is responsible for having like large shows, trade shows, or like the Republican convention that was just held. That was done by the Freeman. They arrange all the tables and the chairs and the drapes and the whatever's needed for a convention. And that's where she works. And then they have, the other son has 2 daughters, and one is employed at a bookstore, and another one is, trying to think, what does she do? She works for a cosmetics company, but I'm not certain which one.
Do you have any relationship with these kids?
Oh, yeah.
Do you maintain a relationship
Oh, yeah.
with them?
Hazel and I are still very good friends, and we enjoy being together.
What about the kids? Do you see
I
them?
see my nephews and nieces. Once a year, we sort of have a reunion with our families. My nephew Harold, that is the son Sal Walensky, who lives in Austin, comes to Dallas at least every 4 to 6 months. And he and his wife come, and then Hazel and her family and my family get together. So it's kind of a Walensky Tracey reunion. And we get to have a luncheon or dinner at some restaurant. And that's how we stay in touch. We talk to each other on the phone a lot.
Do you have memorabilia that you can gift our Jewish Historical Society and our collection that we can add to?
Well, for instance, what have others done? I don't know.
Programs from Jewish programs from Hadassah, for example, or through the years, as far as that would reflect the Jewish community, and how has it changed over the years?
It's just become more spread out, more difficult to get people together. I know that I was more active earlier because I'm matured and have health problems every once in a while, as we all do. And so there are a lot of times that I don't attend meetings of the Dallas Historical Society, but I maintain my membership. And I enjoy some of the programs, and I've attended many. But it is, as I said, a very spread out Jewish community in Dallas.
Right.
And some cities still maintain a little central nucleus and have a large following in one area. But Dallas isn't that way.
Right.
And I have relatives in St. Louis, and I understand theirs is the same way, that it has spread out.
Well, we thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about KIXL, but maybe we'll have to do that on a second.
I would like very much to do that, yeah.
I just said, would you identify yourselves again?
I'm sorry?
Identify yourselves again.
Oh,
I'm Helen Walensky Tracey, and at this moment I'm 86 years old. Proud to be here.
and I'm Ginger Jacobs.
Good job.
Did the tape continue, or we thought it
No,
was ended?
I think.
Yeah, because I brought a book I didn't bring, there was one that's called a Think It Over book, because our station was very well known for these little proverbs, sort of jovial. And I just brought this, and I don't want to lose it. And here's some pictures. I don't know whether, are we on?
Well, can you get the pictures?
I don't know whether we can
Why
film
don't you show
it.
the pictures?
This is Hannah Weberman Rubin at the reception desk at KIXL. And she was our receptionist for several years. And when this picture was taken, that's me. They just brought me in from the office where I work and said, we need somebody to sit at that sofa that's sitting there over to the left. And so I was dragged in, and that was my picture. And this is Hannah answering the telephone.
Gotta get a picture of this too.
And this is Lee Siegel, who originated the station and owned it. And here's some of our stockholders, Tyrone Power, who came to Dallas quite often, and Robert Taylor. And some of the other stockholders were Art Linkletter and Greer Garson. And what's his name?
This is Robert Taylor and Lee Siegel. Can you get a picture of this? Maybe
Okay.
in front of the book as well.
That's the building. Great. Okay. See, Greer Garson, William Holden. I'm trying to think of some of the other stockholders. Oh, goodness.
Do you know how they got them involved? I mean, you've got some movie stars. They're very well-known movie stars.
Lee Siegel earned his money when he worked as a public relations officer or a public relations firm in New York. And he got this idea to do the Dr. IQ show. Well, about that time, World War II broke out. And so they asked his radio show to go to various camps where the servicemen were stationed and to do a Dr. IQ show there. Well, that was so successful. They said, could you bring additional scripts and we'll let the armed forces men be the Dr. IQs. Well, that's how he got to meet Robert Taylor, Tyrone Power, Art Linkletter, William Holden, Melvin Douglas. He was the stockholder. And let's see, trying to think some of the women who, Carol Bruce. Some of these were, and Hildegard. These are old-time Broadway and movie stars.
You mentioned Greer Garson. Was she also involved?
Yes, she was a stockholder, and she lived here in Dallas. But she met Lee when they were in New York, and he used her as a sort of an ambassador to speak to entertain the troops. And he went all over the eastern seaboard entertaining troops with his Dr. IQ show. Well, after that, became kind of passe, or after World War II ended, the show was still popular, but it was like 1945, 46, 47, and he decided he wanted to own his own radio station. And so he was married to Mildred Metzger of Metzger Dairies, and they were a very wealthy family. And she loaned him the money to have a radio station. That's how they got on the air. And then you had to apply to the FCC, and that was when I was working there from the ground up. And we kept waiting until the FCC approved our license so that we could go on the air. We thought I worked there about a year and a half before it ever went on the air.
What was the programming like?
Beautiful music, non-interrupted, no commercials until on the half hour, and on the hour we had commercials. We might play or have announced 7 or 8 commercials all at once, but we'd get it over with, and then we could program 30 minutes or an hour of a symphony or a just popular Broadway type musical numbers, but well-known semi-classics. And that was different for Dallas, because Dallas had nothing like that. They either had, and most cities the size of Dallas had the same thing. You either had country and western, which was called cowboy music, or you had, it wasn't quite rock and roll yet, but it was like, what would you call it? I guess almost jitterbug music.
Jazz
And
music?
black soul music. He got a lot of black soul music. Well, that wasn't what Lee Siegel wanted. He wanted to be able to have dinner music and nice, we had a 2-hour allowance of time from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and that was our real classic when we played symphonies. And we employed one of the former press secretaries of the Dallas Symphony to program our station with classical music from that 2 to 4 period where we allotted just good music. And it became the Good Music Station of Dallas. That's where the title came from. And it was uninterrupted except on the half hour. And that was really a radical change from any radio station, either in Dallas or New York. New York had WOR, I believe, and that was their only classical station, and they didn't play too much Broadway popular music. They played popular symphonies, but not popular music. So this was quite an innovation for Dallas especially, because we were sort of in the backward stages. If you were in New York, you considered Texas as a radical state and a rebel state and very southern. So this was quite different. And that's why it was successful, I think.
How did the Strauss family get involved with those stations?
Well, this is kind of funny. When we were looking for our licensing, Lee Siegel's attorney was Henry Bromberg, well-known Dallasite. And he wanted to do the FCC licensing and be the attorney for that. And he was also one of the later became one of the stockholders. But Lee Siegel said, I want a young man who really will fight for us to get this license. And he said, well, I know just the young man, Robert Strauss. He just opened his practice. He and Richard Gump from the University of Texas were good friends of John Connolly. They all went to school together. Graduated the same year. I think John was a little older, 1 year older. But anyway, that's how he got Bob Strauss. He got a young attorney who would fight the FCC for him. And that's how we got the license.
You want to talk about Robert Strauss later? And what his involvement was? Nice Jewish boy.
Well, he always was our sort of backup man. If we had a problem with anything that had to do with government. Oh, he had previously worked for the FBI. That was his first job out of the University of Texas. He had graduated law school and went to work for J. Edgar Hoover as an FBI investigator. And so was Richard Gump. And so they decided when they resigned from FBI after about 3 or 4 years of service, they decided they were going to start a law firm in Dallas. And so that's how they started their practice. And later they enlarged it to, I think William Thonville came in. He was a very well-known trial attorney. And also what was his name? Irving Goldberg was asked to join that firm also. So before long it became Thonville, Aiken, Gump, Strauss, and Feld. And that was the present name of the firm. But anyway, Bob Strauss was our attorney, and we had to fight, I guess, the FCC to get our licenses. And at that time, they were a little bit prejudiced against Lee Siegel because he was Jewish with that name. Then they saw Robert Strauss had a signature there, and Irving Goldberg had a signature there. So that kind of raised a flag. So it took a lot of fighting and intervening by Robert Strauss to get our license. So we finally did and got it on the air. And so that was in 47, and I went to work there, I think in late 45 or 46. So there was a year and a half that, at least, where we were arguing with the FCC trying to get a license. But it was fun. And anyway, by the time we got on the air, Lee Siegel said, well, now we need a commercial manager who will be in charge of getting the spot announcements and commercial income so that we could survive. And Ted and Bob Strauss said, you know, my brother Ted recently graduated University of Texas, and he's looking for another job. He had been in some other business, and I don't even remember now what it was. But anyway, he came to work for KIXL, and Lee hired him, and he was going to be our commercial manager. And then we found out he didn't really know enough about sales, and we better hire a more experienced salesperson to be the sales manager, and Ted would be under him until he learned the ropes, so to speak. And gradually he did, and so eventually Ted became the commercial manager, but not at the very, very beginning. He was just another salesman. And but they did bring in some good, responsible commercial people that could put the station over, and that's really how it became successful, because they had the very elitist of the Dallas downtown businesses and automobile industries. We had Moore Chevrolet, which is no longer in existence, which became Friendly Chevrolet, I believe. And we had Bankston. At that time it was Bankston Oldsmobile only. And that was one of the first sponsors. And we had Woozy Root Beer, which was the Real Juice Company, or the Glacier Wholesale Drug Company. And Metzger Dairies, of course, and we had Borden Dairies. And at that time, the FCC would not let us put two commercials together of competing firms. Like, you couldn't put a Buick commercial next to a Chevrolet commercial. Even though they were owned by General Motors, you could not have them side by side as commercials. And you could make, you'd have to put like Coca-Cola in between, and you couldn't put Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper together. They had to be separated by another commercial. And that became my job. I was traffic manager, and I was the one who put the commercials on the log and in the proper places when we did a station break. That was every 30 minutes when we were allowed to do commercials. So we could not put two department stores next to each other. At that time, A. Harrison Company was one of our sponsors, and Neiman Marcus was too. And so we would have to separate those. And Sanger, then it was Sanger Brothers. And so that when Sanger Brothers or Teich Gettinger advertised, we had to make sure they were not next to each other. So we'd separate them with a furniture company or an automobile company. and then maybe 15 or, no, 30 minutes apart, we could put it in there, but never closer than 30 minutes. And even on our symphonies, we would have automobile companies usually sponsored the symphony and the operas. And so we had to separate those by 30-minute intervals. But those were FCC regulations. Now, today, I've noticed, and it irritates me still, that during a football game, you will see a commercial on TV that would be Ford, and then Nissan, and then Chrysler, and then Lincoln. That'd be 4 different automobile companies right after another. And we were not allowed to do that. But anyway, that's how we, and then, let's see, Ted Strauss and Bob Strauss later, after Lee Siegel was ready to retire, they decided they would buy the station. And they formed a corporation and purchased the station and held it for, I guess, about 5 years. And then they sold it to a company out of Atlanta. And Bob Strauss by then had become very active in the Democratic Party and helped get Jimmy Carter elected, and later was made ambassador to Russia and World Trade ambassador. So he led a very important life in Washington, D.C. and loved the action. And he still came back to Dallas from time to time. And when I was married to Jerry Lane, who was a CPA, and I was able to convince Bob Strauss that Jerry Lane was the CPA he needed and got him that account, he still came back to Dallas and would always call us, and we'd go out to dinner together, and he would tell us about what Sam Rayburn told him, or he was always bringing up various names that we were familiar with and telling us how they decided on whatever, some important political decision had just been made, and he was in on it. And he was, it thrilled him to know that here this little Jewish boy from Stamford, Texas, made it all the way to Washington, D.C. So we always enjoyed being with him and having dinner, and his wife was so charming too. Helen Strauss was just a lovely lady. And these are pictures of this. George Leslie was with the Dallas Symphony. He was their PR man for a long, long time. As I look through all of these pictures, it just triggers my memory for various things. Well, here I am with Charlie Payne, who was our program director, and I was the traffic manager, so we programmed and made out a log together. And here's Ted Strauss, and that was when he was doing sales, and Tom Massey was the station manager, and these are 2 of our salesmen, and this is part of our writing committee had gone. That's the script department. Here's our station wagon, and this is Roosevelt, the our driver, and I'm trying to think of a title for him. He really wasn't a janitor, but he served in that capacity as well. But Ozell Franklin was his name, and he was later succeeded by another, what was his name? Lincoln, I think, was his name. But anyway, and these are salesmen out in the halls of the various studios. We were one of the first studios that had soundproof individual studios where one announcer was in a soundproof booth up until then, and even KRLD and WFAA did not have as modern a studio as these were. And that was sort of a boon on Lee Siegel's cap, because he patterned it sort of a feather in his cap over. Anyway, I'll just tell you,
Yeah.
he got the idea from the New York studios, but the Dallas studios didn't have anything that good.